Okay, hello everyone. We're going to do a quick little thing before I bring, Kathleen's going to do it with me. I promised Jen B, that I would do it. It's kind of fun. So I never do this, but pull out your phones. And if you have a LinkedIn app, open it. Because she's from LinkedIn, and we're going to, okay? And forgive me if you've already done this before, but since we're in this awesome room of people, and there's probably way too many, just to show you a little trick, especially if you're in a smaller group, click on the People button at the very bottom. Everyone see that?
I got people popping
And then
up.
at the top, it'll say Find Nearby, and click on it. And if your app is open, I will start to see all of your names cascade on my app. And I can link you in. Now, you don't have to accept me. You can just decline.
How long can I stand here and start clicking
Yeah, exactly.
invitations? How much of my talk is this?
I can do it for you backstage.
Okay. Oh, wait, quit on me.
So it might be a lot of, but
aggressive.
it's really good when you're in a small group of 20 or 30 people and you all want to know how to stay in touch, and then you can look on your recently added to know that you added them from this conference. Because sometimes you're like, where did I meet that person? But we were talking about this last night and what a great little tool it is. So there's your little PSA from LinkedIn. I don't know if it's working for you. It's not for me up here, maybe because I got a lot of, but
It's
she's got
working
like
great for me.
100 over on
Yeah.
her screen.
And I'm just clicking invite, so we'll see.
So now when you're done, Kathleen will not only dispel lots of information to you, but she'll be your friend. So, all right.
All right, I'm going
In
to
the
stop
spirit,
for now.
I'll take that back, so
Thank
you're not
you.
in it. So in the spirit of moving on and getting on with the program, this is Kathleen Maley from KeyBank. We've had the pleasure of working together the last month or so on preparing a great talk on how to bring your insights to the business, and I'm going to let her dig right into it. So please help me welcome Kathleen Maley.
Thank you. This is a great room, and backstage they made the mistake of sharing the laser pointer with me, so I'm going to have a little bit of fun probably with that as we go along. I don't typically start with an intro, but I think for this particular talk, it's important that you know a little bit about where I come from, the experience I have, and the type of problems I really had in mind as I was building this talk. So I've been in banking for about the last decade and a half, always within some sort of quantitative space. So I started it in model risk. I built a lot of acquisition and portfolio management risk models for credit card and other unsecured lines. And then I moved into model risk. And for those of you who are modelers and work as modelers in your organization, I would strongly recommend doing a tour in model risk, especially if you work in a heavily regulated area, because that's going to make you a much better modeler. And if you're in model risk, do a couple years as a developer, because it's going to make you a much better validator. But then I was asked to move into what I refer to now as business analytics. And that's really sort of the type of work I had in mind as I was writing this talk. And I think of business analytics as, working with the business on usually ad hoc questions. It's a question they're going to ask once. Usually they need an answer pretty quickly. Things like, hey, what's the impact of the government shutdown going to be? Okay, I don't know. I'll figure it out, And of course, the first part of that is really understanding what they're asking. They don't care what the impact of the government shutdown is. They really care about whether or not they need to worry about the impact of the government shutdown. So I'm going to start with the question that I get over and over and over every single day. Every single question that comes to me in the form of, hey, Kathleen, can you get me this data? Now, I don't know if that resonates with anybody in this room, but that is my job. Hey, Kathleen, can you get me this data? And I've come to appreciate very much what this question represents, because it's really just an invitation, right? And the partner is working on something, they're trying to solve something, they're worried about something, and they think that what they really need from me is the data. I almost never give them what they've asked for. And yet I've had some measure of success. So the question is how? And that's sort of what this talk is about. I really had in mind maybe younger analysts, people who are newer to this type of work, right? I learned much of what you'll see today on the job, never received any formal training on it. Often I learn these lessons in a very, very painful way, so I'm trying to spare you some of that if possible. For managers, you may pick up some tips for coaching your teammates in different ways. And if there are line of business leaders here in the room, it's important that you know that while this talk isn't directed at you, you play a really important role in this. So I hope that you will listen and pay attention and tune into the areas that you're responsible for so that you can do a better job playing your part as well. So I'm going to start with an example. And this is the question that made me fall in love with the type of work I do, that convinced me that this is the type of work I want to do. You know, when I was in modeling and they asked me to take analytics, I was like, oh, no. I'm a modeler. And I'm a modeler. But actually, this work is way more fun. The work I do now is way more fun. It's usually a quicker turnaround. We're not really building a machine. We're solving logic puzzles. There were three things that came together. And this was not at all influenced by any intention of mine. It was just pure dumb luck. So the first thing that happened is my partner did not come to me and say, hey, Kathleen, I need you to get me the year-over-year satisfaction scores of Group A and Group B. Can you do that? Right? And what I typically would have done was, yeah, sure, that's easy. How do you want it cut? Is a snapshot okay, or do you need it trended? Do you just want the Excel file? Do you want the pivot table? Do you need a chart? Right? Now, had I done that, right, I would have landed in a very, very different place with my partner than I did, right? He accidentally brought to me a very different question. And what he did was state this request in a way that clued me into the fact that, one, he had done something, and two, he wanted to see the impact of that change. Now, he was pretty sure he already knew the impact of that change, that he had done this thing in a call center to improve client satisfaction, and so, of course, the client satisfaction improved because of that thing he did. But I started asking questions. Well, what did you do? And when did you do it? And why did you do it? And what were you expecting to see? And a whole bunch of questions. So I thought differently about this problem. It wasn't just fetch me this data. It was I'm trying to show that I've done something here and that there's been an impact. The third thing that I was very, very fortunate to have during the time I was working on this was an absolutely incredible manager who helped me ask those questions in the right way, who helped me acquire the situational awareness that I needed to really be effective, and who taught me how to communicate this answer back to the partner. Right? So again, what could have happened is I said, yeah, here's your data. And he would have said, super, I'm going to spend another $7 million to double the capacity of this specialized call center so that I can increase satisfaction for our most valued clients even that much more. But that's not what happened. What we talked about was, well, why did it get better? And it turned out it really had nothing to do with the $7 million he spent. And this is where the helpful manager comes in, because you can imagine, hey, business partner, you just wasted $7 million. That might not be really well received, right? So being able to communicate this back in an effective way is just as important. But what happened was he understood what we were saying. We were able to communicate it effectively. And he said, okay, great. If it wasn't the money, and it's really just about the talent selection, help me with that. Let's grow this contact center, let's increase, but let's do it in the right way. And I fell in love with this work. It was meaningful. It wasn't just fetching data. Who likes that, right? And then it's like, oh, well, can you cut it this way, and can you cut it that way? And it's this drip, 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 and why don't they know what they want? Right? It resulted in something really meaningful. And the analysis was super fun. I wasn't just fetching data. I was trying to figure out what was going on. I fell in love with this work. Okay, so I think about doing this type of work, solving these sorts of problems, communicating this sort of information, right, as happening in three distinct buckets. There are three distinct things I need to be thinking about when I get this question. The first is defining the question. What do they really want? Hey, Kathleen, can you get me this data? Okay, that doesn't tell me what you want. Right. The second is where we all get our training. If you're a data scientist, if you're a statistician, that's my background. you're really, really good at doing the work. You can pull the data, you can clean the data, you can summarize the data, you can analyze the data. You can draw a conclusion based on what you're seeing, based on what the data is telling you. That part I'm not going to talk about today. You get a lot of formal training in that. The third part is answering the question. And these two bookends are the ends that most people don't really teach us, right? This is what we just sort of have to figure out on our own. All right, so let's talk about the first half of this, right? The first half of this talk, which is really about defining the question. So the first thing is, when the partner says, hey, Kathleen, can you get me this data? I essentially ignore their words, and I hear something very different. What I hear is, Kathleen, I need your help with something. That's it. It's an invitation, right? I need your help with something. Trust yourself, because in order to be effective, you have to be willing to meet your partner as an equal at the table. And there's a certain psychology to this, you know? Some of us have the experience of being in an organization that's often treated as a service arm, right? And our job is to get the data. It's not really our job, right? I know more about solving a problem than my partner ever will when it comes to using data and analytics. I have to know that about myself. I have to trust that about myself. And I have to be willing to meet this person, even when this is a person who is senior to me in the organization, as an equal. I am an expert in my field. Don't you dare tell me how to do my job. Okay? Next, don't say yes. Never say yes. Can you get me this data? Never say yes. But definitely do not say no. Right? That is a recipe for disaster. That is a recipe for, all right, I don't want to work with this person. I'm going to go find somebody that I can work with. And so I stumbled across this. This was, again, accidental. I like to say I'm the luckiest person in the world. I just stumble into good things all the time. Right? So that previous experience, I'd learned that context was really important. If I was going to solve a problem, I had to understand the problem I was trying to solve. Right? I would never learn that by asking how they wanted the data. I had to ask them about the problem they're trying to solve. And I used to say things like, why? What are you going to do with it? What decision are you going to make? That may be perceived by some as combative. And if it is perceived as combative, right, it is likely that I will put the other person in a defensive position. Don't ask me, I know my business, I know what's important, I need your help if you're not going to help me, right? Again, totally off the rails. What this language did was allow me to convey the intention that I'd always held. And it is exactly what it says here. Help me understand what you are trying to achieve so I can better meet your needs. It is far better received in that case. But then we've actually got to start a dialogue, right? And I start with open-ended questions, clarify as you go, and trust your business partner. So it really doesn't matter what open-ended question you start with. I've put a few here that you may find helpful, right? That you can sort of add into your toolkit because you go, okay, help me understand. And they go, well, here's my problem. And then what? You stare at each other and then what? Like, you got to be able to follow it up. You got to have some questions. Once you get started, it's easier, right? You follow the logical flow. I've highlighted a few here that I think are really some of the most important, and I'll tell you why. Who asked the question? If I can get to primary source, I'm better off, right? Some big boss asks a question, and it goes down the line, and it goes down the line, and it eventually comes to me. Hey, Kathleen, I need this data. Why? I don't know. Dennis just said he wants it. Okay, well, Dennis can go jump in a lake. That's not what I do. So where did this question really come from? Let me see if I can get to primary source. I may not be able to get all the way to the person. Like, I'm probably not calling the CEO of my company and saying, okay, you need to help me understand what you're trying to achieve here. But okay, I'll get closer. Ask your partner, what do you think? What do you think is going on? What's your hypothesis, right? They know the problem they're trying to solve better than you do. You know how to solve it using data and analytics. They know their problem better than you do. And this is where the equality comes into play. They know what they're trying to solve. They don't know what they want from you. We shouldn't expect them to know what they want from you. But they do know what problem they're trying to solve. And the other two here really go to just building credibility, which is so important for building trust in a partnership, right? Demonstrate that you actually do know a little bit about what's going on in their business, right? If you support credit card, what do you know about credit card? If you support home equity, what do you know about home equity? If you support client experience, what do you know about client experience, right? You may not be right. The questions you ask, right, may not be exactly the right question, but the more you ask and the more you engage in the dialogue and the more you learn, the better you're going to get. What's really fun about this, and what I love about this, is just like it requires some practice on your part and overcoming that psychology of nerves, asking this of the partner, expecting them to play their part a little bit differently than maybe you have expected them to in the past. It becomes second nature for you. It becomes second nature for them. And I love it right now. I've been at this company now. I've been at Key for about 1.5 years now. And, I love it when I start and a partner calls me, hey, Kathleen, I need this data. Okay, great. What are you trying to do? What are you worried about? What's going on? Okay. Here's what's really going on, but you got to keep it confidential. I hear that all the time. They're going to tell me what's going on because they know if they do, we're going to find a solution, right? There's a little bit of trust and credibility there. And that in and of itself is very rewarding, but I really selfishly, just like I like to watch Real Housewives of New Jersey, really like to know everything that's happening in the company. It's really fun. What are the questions people are grappling with? What are the debates that are going on? And who's on which side of that debate and why? We get to see all of that, right? And the data never lies. People can lie and use data to lie, but the data never lies, right? So I get to sit in the middle of that, which for me is a lot of fun. Okay, so that's defining the question. How do I figure out what I need to be working on, and how do I engage the partner in that dialogue? Now we'll talk about that last step, which is answering the question, right? And so here's sort of the flow. We define the question. Now we got to do all the work, right? This is everything you guys know how to do. Then we got to answer the question. Now, very often, again, in my world, answering the question means creating something on paper, putting something on paper. Not always, but usually, at the bare minimum, an email that makes some kind of sense. Usually, it's a PowerPoint slide. And so when I get to this stage, when I'm getting ready to answer the question, right, I know the conclusion, I know what's going on, now I just need to answer the question. I really ask myself 2 questions. I work backward, and I ask myself 2 questions. What is my conclusion, and how do I know? Everything else falls on the cutting room floor, period, without exception. When I am putting together a message, again, usually on paper, every single mark on that paper has a very deliberate purpose, and I can tell you exactly what it's for. I have to know exactly what it's for. So what's my conclusion, and how do I know? And then I find one of my very best resources in an analytical teammate, right, that I can talk about this with. For me, right, the first step of getting something on paper is being able to talk about it. So talk it out and use conversational language. When I started preparing for this talk, this is something, what I'm sharing with you today, I do all the time. I work with my teammates on this all the time. But I started trying to say, how do I lay out this logical flow of information? It was a complete word salad. And I've got some of my teammates from KeyBank here today, which is great. They all went through this, and they sat through the word salad, and they sort of looked at me like, do you really know what you're talking about? But they helped me sort of narrow it down and sort of create now this logical flow, this something that actually is helpful in sharing information. Anytime I'm working on an analytics project, it's exactly the same thing. It starts off with a word salad, and eventually, okay, I know my story, right? What did you just say? That's it. That's the headline. That's what goes at the top of the page. If I'm struggling to explain something, maybe I don't really understand it that well, and I maybe need to go back and do a little bit more work. Sometimes I say, you know what, actually that's not really relevant, let's not worry about it. In that case, it doesn't go on the page. I move off of it. So I get to deal with the messiness with my teammates, the people I trust, the people who can actually help me think through the work, before I go back to the partner, right? My job is to take the answer to the partner, not have them join me in the journey of creating the answer, right? Which isn't to say that these aren't iterative Sometimes they're iterative, but generally speaking, okay? And the last thing I'll say is give yourself plenty of time and plan for multiple iterations. I love this quote by Blaise Pascal, and I think everybody probably knows Pascal's triangle, same guy, right? I've only made this letter longer than usual. I've made this letter longer than usual only because I've not had the time to make it shorter. If I want to communicate a clear and succinct message that my business partner can understand, I need to be willing to invest the time, right? So this is usually several iterations. I'll tell you a little side story. I worked for a guy. He was not an analyst, and that may have been a good thing, because what I learned from him was how to create a slide, right? How to put that story on paper. There were times we would do 24 iterations of a slide. Now, I think that's a bit extreme, but if I'm doing 4 or 5 iterations of a slide, that doesn't feel unusual to me, right? And if I'm looking at 3 or 4 hours, or 5 or 6, that also is not unusual to me. And for a long, long time, I would say, what's wrong with me? Why does it take me so long? Everybody else must be able to do this faster. And then I just decided, no, that's probably not true. It probably really is this hard, because I've been doing it for this long. It still takes this much time. But the payoff is worth it. I take it to a partner, and they go, oh, I get it. I understand, right? I'm going to take some action, or now this helps me make a decision. And that's my goal. So give yourself plenty of time and plan for multiple iterations. Okay, so what I'd like to do is actually take you through an example. This is a real example. And it just, again, lucky. We happened to be working on this. My team happened to be working on this while I was putting this talk together. And I asked permission of the woman whose work this is, because this is not my work, this is her work. Can I use this as an example? And so what we've got here is iteration 1, and then I'll walk you through the final iteration. And what is on the page doesn't matter, right? Couple of notes. We did, of course, have some visualization. We had some sharing of actual data. I didn't include that here just because that's not really the focus. I just included the text. And I want to walk you through this text that is honestly exactly what it needs to be if our objective is demonstrating the validity of the answer. It is perfectly organized to speak to another statistician, to give that statistician confidence in the result, right? We've got an objective. What are we trying to measure? Some of the methodology. What was the time period, right? This is, again, banking. We do a whole lot with observational data. So we're often sort of looking in the back, in the rearview mirror, trying to figure out, well, what are 2 basically relevant comparison groups so that I can come up with something that I at least have some measure of confidence in, right? There's, of course, our disclaimer that this doesn't prove causality. Little bit of the result. All right, what did we see relative to revenue? What did we see relative to usage of this digital capability? This, for anyone who is curious, RDC, remote deposit capture. You know, you take a picture of your check to deposit it that way instead of going to an ATM. And then finally, our answer, right? And we found the dollar impact, which I'm obviously not sharing here. Right? What's the revenue impact? Well, it's X dollars plus or minus Y. Right? Of course, there's a margin of error, right? Perfect if what I want to demonstrate is the validity of the work. But that wasn't our objective. Our objective was a conversation with a business partner. And I won't get into what they were actually trying to do with this, right? Of course, we knew what that was. We wouldn't have started the work otherwise. And what we started with, right? Again, work backward. Work backward. You do the work, you draw your conclusion, what's your answer? And when you go to talk to your business partner, you start with your answer, right? I can tell you, this was the difference in revenue. Those who started using this capability and those who didn't. And then everything else is, what's my conclusion? How do I know? Still not going to claim causality. There's a lot of other stuff going on here. These people are just generally more engaged. They generally deposit more checks, right? What's my conclusion? How do I know? What's my conclusion? How do I know? Always. It's a rough framework. Every single question you work on is going to have its own little twist. But by and large, I have found this general framework to be incredibly helpful and meaningful in producing value. And that's really my job. My job is to produce value for my company. It's a nice side benefit that I happen to love this type of work, and I love sort of detangling these riddles. So I'm going to stop there, really. I've left a lot of time for questions. I hope there are a lot of questions, you know. But again, all right, defining the question, hear the question differently, and trust yourself. They're asking for your help. They don't know how to articulate that, but that's all that's going on there. Don't say yes, but definitely don't say no. In fact, it's to the point now where my partners will say, hey, Kathleen, I need this data. I know you're going to ask, so here's what I'm trying to do. I still have questions, and I'll still follow up with questions. Ask open-ended questions, clarify as you go, and trust your partner. You're an expert in solving their problem. They are an expert in the problem they're trying to solve. And then answering the question. Work backward and focus on the story. Start with the answer. Talk it out. Use conversational language. That's how you'll talk about it when you present it to the partner. And finally, give yourself plenty of time. It will be time-consuming. Plan for multiple iterations. So I'm going to stop there and hope that there are lots of questions out there. There's a question here? Okay.
I love that you said, you can lie with data, but data doesn't lie. I find myself wanting to say that out loud all the time. So how do you approach that when stakeholders they receive the results that are really unexpected, or you're just providing brand new insights and they don't want to believe it, but data doesn't lie?
So I'll go back to that example, and I'll take a little bit more time to go through it, because that's really what I was up against, right? Here's a big fancy business partner. He was like 2 down from the CEO at one of the largest banks in the world. And he spent $7 million, and he was going to show that those $7 million were well spent. And so when I found the answer, and I still remember, I was with my boss. It was probably 8 o'clock at night, how every fire drills, right? But we're working on it, and part of the reason we were there is just because we were excited about the problem. And we're looking at it, and all of a sudden, right, and everything looked good, right? It really looked, when I looked at the data, it looked like, wow, he did this thing, and client satisfaction went up for the clients who went to that gate, and it didn't go up for the clients who didn't. And then all of a sudden, it hit me that we were just looking at the data all wrong, and we had to transpose the data. And when we transposed the data, what we saw was, in effect, there was absolutely no difference at all, right? And he'd spent this $7 million. It's a call center. You guys know what a call center is. You call in, you get your problem solved. He spent it on branding and training. And the branding I never understood, because the caller doesn't see the branding. So I don't know, was this just supposed to motivate the call center agents? It was wasted. It was completely wasted. And what he'd done is he'd taken the very, very best agents, and he had concentrated them in a single place. And so we had to say, okay, how do I take this back to this guy who is going to be really, really upset about his wasted $7 million, who's not going to like this story? So, I refer to it as spin, put a little spin on it, which is different than dishonest. It's not just telling him what he wants to hear. It's giving him his talking points so that he can save face while doing the right thing. Hey, congratulations. You know your business so well that you were able to identify your very best people and concentrate them so that you can better direct your best clients, your most valuable clients, to this special center. Now let's just sort of brush to the side and sort of de-emphasize the $7 million. That's no longer our ask. We're just going to sort of put that to the side. But he could then go and tell a very positive story. Look at all of the wonderful things I did. He never talked about the $7 million again. I didn't care that he didn't talk about it. I only cared that he didn't spend it. And so there is a bit of finesse. And that's why I said, having the right manager is really, really helpful. But if you don't have the right manager, maybe you have a friend, maybe you have a colleague, Maybe you have someone in the business that you already have credibility with, that trusts you and you trust that person, that can help you figure out how to tell that story. I really do believe, right, that I have an obligation to the validity of the work that we do. And that's one reason why I like being in a centralized analytics organization, because the individuals who want to make these claims are not my bosses. I really, truly get to be in a place where I'm objective. I still work very, very hard to help my partners be as successful as possible.
Hi, thanks. I'm coming at these kinds of interactions sort of from the other side, sort of that quote-unquote manager side or business side. And I'm wondering if you've got some advice for folks like me to best interact with folks on teams such as yours when the intention is positive in that an analyst might be trying to really help one understand all of the sort of the options and things to consider, but they might be going a little bit outside of the ask of what we're trying to accomplish, and sort of kind of helping them maintain focus without being rude or devaluing their expertise in any way, because we'd be lost without folks such as yourself. How you can help kind of keep them on track and guide them in a positive way.
So again, I would say a little bit of psychology. Not being a psychologist, full disclaimer, not a psychologist. But I think, it's what I typically do is, you're absolutely right. That's not the question we're answering today. First, I need to answer this question. But I want to keep track of that, and if you really think there's value in that. Sometimes you do need to go to that individual's manager and say, I want you to help me. I don't want to damage this relationship, but it's the thing I really need isn't getting done, and I really need this thing, and while this might be really interesting, I'm not ready to take action on it, and therefore any effort here is ultimately wasted. And in fact, if you haven't had that conversation with your analyst, you might, right? To say, look, I'm not saying this doesn't matter and wouldn't drive value, but I can't deploy it today, and if I can't deploy it today, then your effort is wasted. I need you here, and when we're ready, we'll move here.
Hi. I'm curious how you've found success in building kind of like a common understanding between the business side and the technical side when it comes to answering some of these questions. Even like what you were saying about giving yourself lots of time to come to iterate through and make sure you have the right conclusion, when a lot of people on the business side might just think, oh, it's super easy, just grab the data and give it to me. So I'm curious what your best practices have been for even coming to this shared understanding of what a project or a question means for the technical or analyst side.
So it's a couple of things. Number one, it's building relationships, right, and building that trust and credibility. So I meet my partners one-on-one, and we just go for coffee. I try to meet with them in person whenever I can. If there's a meeting and I have a choice between being on the phone or being in the room, I am in the room. I go to their office. And so I really interact with them face-to-face and in a very personal and human way. The other thing I do is tell them all the time, this one's easy, this one is not easy, right? And that is part of defining the problem, right? Up front. Okay, what are you trying to do, and why does it matter, and when do you need it? And they'll always say, well, as soon as possible. So then I say, okay, but is there a meeting coming up? And then we talk about, okay, if you have 3 days before that meeting, number one, come to me sooner next time. And I can literally say this because I have a relationship, and we'll joke, and everybody's friendly. And it's okay, but here's what we can do in 3 days. I can at least get you to the place where you can demonstrate that you're working on it. I can at least get you to a place where you can demonstrate that we know what we need to go after. I can give you more information about how long it's going to take. I can break it down into milestones, which is really, really important, right? And frankly, I think milestones are important also because of the iterative nature of this. Checking in, is this still right? Does this give you a different thought? Do we need to switch directions? So what it always comes down to for me is dialogue.
Hi there. So I definitely really resonate with everything you're saying, so thank you so much. Question, have you tried to work with your stakeholders to be more proactive so you don't have urgent requests, and like how you address that.
So yes, and we have a lot of what I refer to as dynamic reporting, right? Those places where they've got nice data, and they can sort of filter it, and they can point and click, and they can look at different stuff. So a lot of, hey, I just need this number. I just need to know, what happened last year at this time, because we're not sure if what's happening this year is different or not. So there's nothing about why is it different, just is it different. So we try to give our partners tools like that, and I have a peer who does all of our automated reporting, and almost all of it now is through Tableau, and that has been very, very effective for us. But the reality is there are always new questions, and if there weren't new questions, you wouldn't need my function. And so I think about, we play a really important role, and I talk about this a lot with my team and with my partners. If you're asking me to answer the same question 2 or 3 or 4 times, then what you really need is a report. And if you are trying to make the same decision, but many, 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 many times, what you need is a model. If you're trying to understand what in the heck is going on with something you've never seen before, or is looking very different, or if you have a new question that you've never conceived of before, then you need a team like mine. So it's really, really hard to take a question that we've never conceived of before and turn that into something that already exists. So there's a lot we can do to get a lot of the data fetching off of our plate and a lot of the sort of more dynamic reporting off of our plate. But if it's a really new question, it's hard. Now, I will say, within individual projects, I can usually, at this point, say, well, if they're asking for this, they're also going to want to know this, 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 and this. So let's make sure we get all of that at the start.
Hi. I have a question from here. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to ask this question. I really like the workflow you laid out for us to think about how to approach a problem, step by step, going backward. I really like this idea. My question is about, when you talk about, you usually ask 2 questions. What's the conclusion? And how do I know? I think this question addressed to business partners, right? So in some cases, the business partner, in majority of the cases, the business partner know how to solve this problem or what are the factors we need to take into account. But in some other cases, even the business partners may not know how to solve that problem or what are the possible pathways to success. So in this situation, how do you go about answering the second question, which is how do I know how to solve it? One of the examples is, for example, there's certain knowledge that will lead from data to conclusion. However, the knowledge coming from different parts. Say, an expert may have a different opinion on solving this problem than another expert. How do you navigate through all these expert opinions and to find the most holistic approach to solve it? Thank you.
So I'll give you another example, and this is something we are actually in the middle of right now as well. What we're trying to do is sort of define a standard set of criteria that applies to all of our individual product lines, for some enterprise-wide program that we want to start up. So here's the problem with that. My checking partner wants one set of criteria because that's how he will optimize his checking portfolio. I have a credit card partner who wants a different set of criteria because that's how he's going to optimize his credit card portfolio. And a third partner who's trying to optimize his mortgage portfolio. Again, this is one of the ways, or one of the reasons why I like sitting in a centralized organization, because I get to be objective. And what I basically get to say is, look, if we're going to optimize for our company and for our clients, none of you are going to get what you want. So let me show you what it looks like for everybody when I use the checking criteria. Let me show you what it looks like for everybody when I use the card criteria and the mortgage criteria. And not only do I look at the impact to the individual portfolios, then of course we look at the impact to our overall retail bank. It's not always easy to put that on paper, and it can sometimes be tricky. But I've also got some distance there. I've learned how to get some distance there, right? My job is not the decision. But my job is to make sure that the decision is informed. Sometimes my partners don't really want to make an informed decision because maybe the information I'm providing leads them in a different direction, a harder direction, a direction they don't want to go, a direction that's better for the bank overall, and maybe not optimal for their individual portfolio. And that's just part of the job. This is the information, right? And all the partners have to come together and hash it out. They have to make the decision. And so being willing to put that decision back on them with all of the facts on the table and making sure that maybe there are a few other people who need those facts, not just those 3 guys, that's often the way I approach that sort of thing.
This will be our last question.
Hello? Hello? Oh, now it is. Okay. Hi there. This was a great presentation. I definitely could relate to a lot of what you were talking about. So I'm in category management in the food industry. So my question is, when you have a lot of these requests coming in, have you found any kind of efficiencies within your tools or your systems to be able to kind of have like a head start on these kind of questions? Or do you find yourself starting from scratch for each of these, and then it's just one of those things that's not going to be efficient, and you just have to answer those questions? And that's kind of what I'm struggling with now with a lot of asks, and it's very time consuming. So
Yeah.
would love your
Yeah.
input.
I mean, I can tell you that we struggle with the same thing, so I can at least offer you empathy. But I will say, like, this is where the underground data store starts to rear its ugly head, right? What does my team do? They save the data that they've pulled before. They make sure that they know, like, okay, 85% of the questions I'm going to get are at least going to be based on this core. I'm going to make sure I have that core where I need it, when I need it. I mean, it's not ideal, and certainly I wouldn't want to say that with my chief information officer in the room, but the reality is it happens. We are, as many organizations who are not, who weren't born digital, trying to do more with our data systems and operations, but it's still a big challenge. So what ends up happening is we get yelled at because we're taking up too much space, and it's not that I ignore those emails, it's just that I trust my team to make the right decision for the business. All right, I heard that was the last question, so I'll thank you all for your time today, and it was a real pleasure being here.
I may or may not have been talking back there. Thank you, Kathleen. We'll be back at 10:45, right? Is that the time we are at? Yes, 10:45 for the last session in here, then before we have our closing keynote. So one more strategy track conversation. Actually, this is a conversation with, here we go. You can tell. Jen's going to come back up and have a Q&A session with Amanda, who gave the R presentation yesterday. So this is really about getting your questions answered that Amanda can field for you. And then we'll be back one more time in this room for the final keynote with Kathy Kuntz. So enjoy your break. We'll see you back in 15. Thanks.